Colby, what is your beach body looking like these days?
Ooh, yeah, put me
Just
on the
jumping right
spot.
in.
It's not bad. It's actually I would be very happy to go to the beach right now and be like, yeah, let's do it. I think so, honestly.
Sweet.
Maybe because it's like I'm getting ready. I'm just doing pre-prep, so there's that. But even sir, I like riding waves. If you're doing some body surfing, going in the water in general, so I'm down regardless of how my body fat's looking.
Wow. See, I'm the guy who, regardless of what my body fat level is looking like, I'm wearing the sunblocker clothing at the beach because I don't want
A beekeeper outfit.
sun is evil. I don't want it to harm my vampire skin, please.
Mm.
So that will
So
get
you're just
right.
admitted to being a vampire, is what I just heard.
Dude, very quick tangent. Uh, we watched Nosferatu recently.
Okay,
Um,
nice.
Legitimately one of my favorite movies I've ever seen in my entire life. We're probably
Really?
gonna watch it. It's like 2 hours and 15 minutes long or something like that, I think.
Damn. Okay.
Um, so I watched it on Peacock, and it has some extra scenes apparently, so they say.
Mm,
But yeah, we're probably gonna watch it again because it was just that good. But I'm like on my vampire thing again because I'm like, oh, this is so cool, you know?
nice, nice.
Yeah.
So never, no beach this year at all then, because it's in vampire mode and it's not happening. But
I'm not a
what about the
beach
people
guy.
that do want to go to the beach? Not the non-vampires.
Well, they're wrong, but other than that, it's kind of time to start thinking about it, right? Like if you're
Mm,
somebody who wants to, you want to go out on the beach and maybe here coming out of the winter hibernation, you're a little bit uncomfortable with current body fat levels or whatever, or maybe you just been bulking and living the life and enjoying it and whatever. Like that's awesome. And there's nothing wrong with you're perfect exactly how you are. But there's nothing wrong with having some body comp goals and stuff, right? So for the people who want to do that, now's the time to be thinking about it because the summer is right around the corner, right? So we're going to talk about how to set yourself up a little bit here and get some of that fat loss done so you can go be a normal person, I guess, and enjoy being outside.
yeah, I mean, we did just have daylight savings, so we got more sunshine. At least here in the Northeast, we're getting. I guess it's not freezing cold and below freezing and snow, and we have some sun. If you could see behind me, it's feeling like it. So I think it's a perfect time, like you said, to start thinking about it because a lot of people do base their body composition goals off the seasons, and I don't think that's inherently wrong, right? People, are, hey, you know what? Let me just. I spent a lot of time being less active because it was cold out, and it's wintertime. I was just busy doing work, coming from the holidays, whatever it might be, right? People just tend to be a little bit less active and eat a little bit more. Totally fine. But then as the weather gets better, they're like, yeah, beach is coming. Maybe I should start adjusting. So I think that's completely fine. But I think before we touch on that, I do have to address the fact that I'm very upset because if you see my shirt, if you see my plushies on the side, it is Mario Day. Also, on top of it being daylight savings and all that, and Jake's not celebrating because he says I don't care about those plumbers. But that's okay. We're gonna continue either way. But if you are celebrating Mario Day, happy Mario Day. I know I am because it's fun, and that was one of the first games I played, Super Mario, on the NES, SNES, all that. It was just cool to get into, but always something to celebrate with the
Yeah, I
gaming
mean,
world, right?
I'm a little bit offended to be honest because you're celebrating this guy who's just like beating up turtle, like animal brutality. I just don't. He beats all these plants. He eats all these mushrooms. Like I just don't. I don't know if this is the kind of person we should be putting on a pedestal.
You know what? I didn't think about that, and that's I kind of want to dive into that rather than the summer thing. But I think the listeners want to know how to get shredded, so we'll save the Super Mario in depth analysis for next episode. I'm actually very excited for that. But yeah, I think as we talked about, right? You're thinking about you know dieting. You think about getting ready for summer and what that kind of looks like. And as we always do, and we're going to emphasize, we'll talk a little bit now, but in a lot of episodes we talked about just, I think it's important again to look at the why, right? And if the why starts with, I just want to be ready for summer, again, that's okay. But I think it's going to be helpful to dig a little bit deeper and to maybe have something else to look forward to or to tie some meaning towards, right? Because especially as you get down the line, maybe it's if motivation is lacking, if discipline is lacking, and you're struggling to make it through, remembering your why can be helpful. So I think that's going to be important for you to do. But again, we talked about that quite a lot. So I think specifically here, one thing I want to talk about was the idea of do you need to be going into a dieting phase right now, or have you should you? Right. And as Jake said earlier, you don't technically have to. If you want to, that's okay. But I think for those who maybe want to, thinking a little bit about if it's appropriate to, right? Because and what I mean by that is, you know, a lot of the times we see people who go through very frequent dieting phases, right? They're just dieting so often. And maybe it's because those dieting phases aren't successful. But again, that's why we're talking about it here. Or they feel like their gaining phases go a little bit too far off on the other end, right? They gain a little bit too quickly, or they're a little bit too much, and they feel uncomfortable at an earlier rate. Maybe, I think that's pretty normal and that happens. But maybe that's, again, something to look deeper into. So I think deciding whether or not it's appropriate can be something to think about. It can be a hard thing to think about, right? Because you're saying like, hey, am I going to potentially give up this short term like goal that I have for the longer term, potentially setting myself up for more success down the line? Right. So I'm curious to hear what you think about that. Is that something that you ever maybe question on other clients for yourself, thinking like, hey, when is it appropriate to diet and what that looks like? And like, is there prerequisites? Does that really matter? Just things, maybe boxes that you're looking for taking for like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I love that you brought that up first, right? Because that's, I mean, that's one of the this is like the groundwork, right? It's like, should we even try to do this? Because it's, as you said, I think a big one is the, are we continually trying to do this? Which is, it can be tricky, right? Because like at some point we want to get a successful one in there to increase the person's confidence in their ability to do it and all this. But like, if it's just been this cyclical process, it's probably worth taking an extended period of time away from it and then sort of regather yourself, maybe a different approach, coach, whatever, right? Just changing something. So that's always something to look out for. But other things I think about are like, what else is going on in life? Because is there like perfect times? You could argue whatever, but like if you're finding yourself, you're just going to be in this incredibly stressful, like maybe you want to get leaner for the summer, but you're also in the middle of moving and you're changing jobs and you're going through a divorce and your dog just died and you're whatever, like just so much stuff, right? Then is it the best time to add more stress to that? Maybe not. Or maybe it's something where uh, you are not going to be able to be super active. You're not going to be able to train very much. You're not, maybe not the best time to be in a deficit, a little higher risk of muscle loss that way. So on and so forth. And the opposites, right? It's kind of you have some runway of lower stress. Cool. Or maybe you're like, there's some stuff cleared off your plate. You have more time that you can be more active. You can be moving around more. You can be more distracted. So you're not thinking about, food as much and whatever. So thinking about those things can be nice to help decide, like, should we do this or should we not? And then also the long-term sort of physique training goals or whatever, right? Like if somebody has, if their longer term goals may or may not make sense to do a diet right now. As we kind of it's different for everybody in their context and their goals and how advanced they are in their training career and all these things. But just like checking in and be like, does this make sense? Sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes, even if on paper it makes sense, I don't know if let me know if you've had this. Maybe I'm crazy, but I've had this with myself. My girlfriend has had this. And then like some clients, I've noticed this where it's like on paper, everything seems to kind of be like, cool, this makes sense. We can do this now. Awesome. But your body just doesn't cooperate for some weird reason. Like it's just, things just aren't moving, even though on paper, I'm like, this should absolutely be a deficit. And I don't want to run us into the ground. Just like, maybe it's just not the right time for whatever reason. The universe is just telling us like, hey, chill right now. And then, so I don't know. Have you noticed that before?
Yeah, I think it's like that gut feeling. But I mean, there is that relationship between like the gut and in the mind and how that works. So it's like your
Sure.
body's saying, "Hey, dude, like you might think you're good, but maybe you're not." And I think what that happens and what that looks like for me is if I have so much going on, I get into like this flow state, right? Or like this is it's a bell curve where I get to a point where this stress is enough and it's helpful for me, and too little is a lot, not enough, and too much is too much. But my threshold might be a little bit higher on that high end. So like if I have a lot of stuff going on, sometimes it feels like I'm fine and I'm doing it. Like I know what I need to do. I'm here, I'm there. Like I'm just operating and performing well. But like there might not be the immediate effects of that, but you
Yeah.
probably will catch up to you later on. So I think that's maybe what goes on, at least specifically for me. So it's just one of those things where you're kind of like masking it, and you're like, yeah, dude, you're fine, you're good. But it's like body and mind can be different at some point. So you have to
Sure.
listen to both and try to figure out which one's telling the truth, which one's lying, and because we are humans. We do what we can to survive, and if that means being in these hyper stressed states, sometimes you kind of have to need to. I mean, especially going through the PhD and working and living
Sure.
and trying to survive and do all that. It's just like, is that not life? That's you're supposed to be
It's all
stressed all the
about
time, right?
coping.
Yeah, we're
All
just
about coping.
big copers. We got the copium supplies just ready to go, always hooked up IV, and it's just
Mhm.
we're trying to make it. But yeah, I think that happens, and I think you put it so well, where it's one of those things where you just like just have that, that checklist and try to figure it out because, like you said, it may not always be appropriate, and I think it could be tough to come to that conclusion, but sometimes it really needs to. And I think just thinking of the long term is very helpful here, and in general, it is. But I think just trying to figure out like, hey, is like what are my goals? Again, this goes back to your why and the goals. What are my goals? How important are they to me? Is the short-term goals more important than the long-term goals? Where does that look like? How does that fit into my life? And trying to deciding from there. So I think it's, again, a good place to start to try to figure out. And then from there, if you feel like you're ready for it, and again, maybe you're not ready for it, but it just needs to happen, or you feel like it's just the way to go because you have more of a strict timeline. Maybe it is a competition, maybe it is a photo shoot, right? I think having something to aim towards can also be helpful, right? Like if there is a specific end date in mind, right? If you're like, okay, summer starts on June 22nd or whatever day it is, right? And that's your goal, cool, we can use that. Or if it's like somewhere in the middle of the summer because you have a photo shoot or a wedding you're going to, having some end date is helpful. It doesn't have to even be super accurate. There's something to work backwards from. So we see what the timeline is like, right? Hey, do we have 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, 20 weeks? What are we working with? Because from there, again, it can help us decide if it's appropriate or not. But two, it helps us decide our approach, right? Because it's might be one of those things where maybe we need to start a little bit earlier because maybe you haven't been tracking or you don't know what your maintenance calories are just because you never tracked before. So maybe we need a little bit more time to get some information so that we can go into the successful phase, right? So I think the timeline can be very helpful, but also we don't want it to be stressful because if you're like, hey, it's only 10 weeks and I want to get shredded to the bone and I'm also 28% body fat, so how are we doing this? And, hey man, maybe not the right time to do it. Well, we'll work on some skills and we'll come to a point where we can get to there, but maybe not right now. Right. So I think the end date can be helpful with that, or even just having those specific goals. Be specific, right? Is it a look you're looking for? Is it a body fat percentage? Because sometimes that's what sometimes people want, or it is like, I want to look like Ryan Reynolds in Deadpool in this part, something that you're going for. But then I think when you get attached to specific numbers and specific looks, it could also be a double-edged sword, right? Because if you, again, if you have this goal and it doesn't line up too much with your timeline, right? We're going for that 10-week shred to look like Ryan Reynolds. Are you really setting yourself up for success here or for failure? And then how does that affect your mental state and then your future state and how you look at dieting versus not dieting versus your own self-worth versus all these things, right? It can be a lot more than what it actually looks like on the surface. And I think it's important to address that. And that's why we talk so much about looking at the why, looking if it's appropriate. But yeah, I think, is that something you've come across as well, where you see people who maybe attach too much to the number? Because last episode, and I mean, 2 episodes ago, we talked about attaching to numbers specifically for powerlifting and numbers in the bar. But here we're talking more about like, body fat percentages or specific looks and how that can be, a little bit restrictive. Is that something that comes up in your practice a lot, or?
Yeah, for sure, man. And it kind of happens both ways, right? Like sometimes you see guys who are like, I want to be 200 pounds. This was me, right? I wanted to be
Oh
200
yeah,
pounds so bad. And I let my body fat level get probably, meaningfully higher than it needed to be. But darn it, I was 200 pounds, right? Um, but yes, like we certainly see it. And I think that you are spot on that this can be really, really helpful. Like it's almost like an accountability thing, right? Like you have like there's something. It's not just this total nebulous, oh, we'll just kind of do it when we do it, which for some people works great, right? Like it's not that everybody's just bound to fail if they don't have some sort of deadline, but um some people at least will need that to kind of keep themselves on track, right? But I think the other important piece that we've talked about a lot also through in prior episodes is like we set the deadline, awesome, but let's not think only about that deadline, that end product, that number, that look, that whatever. Like, let's make those process-oriented goals too along the way. But you can only make the process-oriented goals if you know what the process is building towards, right? So setting these sorts of goals, I think, is still helpful. But yeah, I mean, I think that we have this like push and pull of the benefits of doing this sort of thing, but also we need to make sure that we have the right perspective, right? Like, there's this look or this scale weight that I'm aiming for. Cool. Now I need to, like you said, we can plan backwards, make sure we give ourselves enough time. If we feel like we need to lose a certain amount of pounds or kilos or whatever to get there, add some more, because you're probably underestimating how much fat you're carrying, because we all do. But you got to make sure you give yourself enough time. You got to make sure that you have a pace that not only is long enough based on the research, like we'll mention that later probably, but also a pace that's appropriate for your just sustainability. And are you going to be absolutely miserable and starving all the time, or can it be more casual, right? And you can leave more room for other life things, going out to eat every once in a while and whatever. So I think that's a very important point, to kind of have those goals, but just as importantly, have the perspective and context around it. I guess that could be a segue into, well, when we do this, we have this goal, we're trying to plan backwards a little bit. How should I go about figuring out how much weight, like how many pounds I need to lose, how many kilos I need to lose, how much time do I need to achieve that much loss? Like, what's the math, right? Everyone's favorite part of this whole thing. What's the numbers? What's the math?
Oh no, you're asking me? Let me get my abacus out.
Yeah, exactly.
It's yeah. I think like I said, the math helps us get as close as we can, but even then, it's not gonna get us exactly there. And that's important to remember too. Along with the having the goal number and the scale weight, the body fat percentage, we're just using it as an estimate, right? And it might be less, it might be more, but a lot of times it's like, as you said, you probably have more than you think you need to lose. And it's probably going to take longer than you think you need. And then, of course, life's going to happen too. So it's not that we want to scare you in that sense, but preparing yourself for the inevitable in a way, but also just giving yourself plenty of time, right? More time than you even need, because quote unquote worst case scenario, you get to your goal earlier and then you can just eat more food, or you can just enjoy life more, or you can have more flexibility, like you said, because you have more time to work with. So I think that's also very helpful. But like you said, when we were looking at the math, what that looks like, I always just like to start with kind of looking at a specific rate of loss, right? And if we're looking at the literature, a lot of times this looks like 0.5 to 1% of total body weight loss per week. And this number mainly comes from just something that is typically sustainable, but also going to give us pretty good insurance that we're not losing muscle, right? So we're not going too fast, because we want to make sure we're actually losing it, but we also don't want to go too slow where we're spending too much time dieting, because then we're just dieting forever, and that's usually not that fun.
It's hard to track too. If it's too small of a percent, then you're tracking 0.1 pounds a week or whatever. Like,
and is that actual change, or is that just fluctuation that's normal, right? So yeah, I think that's why you have that number, the 0.5 to 1%, also very easy to math out, and also important that it's a range, because it's gonna need to be flexible, right? Because if it's 0.9, is that failure? No, obviously not. You're within the range. You're fine. Because again, sometimes life's going to happen. Sometimes you're going to have more water in your system, more salt, more food, just gut volume, whatever it is, right? There's these things that come into play that can be scary if you're just looking at the number. But if we understand what affects that number, which is a lot of things, it just helps us out more often, right? And I think, again, that's why the averages and the ranges are very helpful and just underrated, because I've recently fallen into that where it's like, okay, I've been 81.8 for 5 days straight now. That makes no sense. Like, there's no way. I'm eating 1,800 calories. Like, that's low. That's like a decent deficit for me, right? That's not like super low, but that's where I need to be to lose what I was supposed to. But it wasn't happening. So in my mind, it's like, am I doing something wrong? Should I cut calories? Should I increase step count? Should I do something? And it's like, dude, look at the averages. Look at the previous week average. Like, oh yeah, that happens where you have a couple days in a row and then it drops off later, right? So again, another reason why having data is important and looking at the averages. So long as my average is within that range of the 0.5 to 1%, I'd consider that a success. And importantly, if it's not, is it just 1 week that happens, or is it 2 weeks? Is it 3 weeks? Like, is that a trend that's actually happening, or again, was it just that 1 week where all the weigh-ins affected that average? And then looking back to help interpret that, right? Because even if we have math, even if we have these ranges we're shooting for, like we said, things can affect it so much. So I think that's just a good place typically to start, because it's doable, it's easy to math out, it has some research behind it, why we're doing it. And I think importantly, when we're thinking about that and why, because some people might look at that and say, well, I could lose more. You could. But it comes to that idea of, are we looking at just losing weight, or are we looking at losing body fat, right? Because for most of us, body composition is important, meaning, how much muscle we have, how much body fat we have, and muscle weighs stuff too, right? That's going to affect what's on the
Sure.
scale. That's going to affect how we look overall. Because sometimes if we end up just chasing scale weights, we can lose too fast. And if we're losing fast, we're more likely to be losing that hard earned muscle. And that's what we don't want, right? It's not just about losing that scale weight, it's about how we look at the end. And for me, I want the muscle to be there. I worked hard for that. Most people do, because again, that takes time to build the muscle. So why are we going to potentially risk that by losing weight too quickly just to hit a scale weight, right? That's almost like going against what the overarching theme is. So yeah, I think the rate of loss can be helpful there. The ranges are important overall, but is that, and then of course sometimes you can go a little bit higher than that. I think some people, if you have more to lose, you can maybe get away with the 1.5. Or if you're super early on, where it's like, okay, the first week or two, you're going to see some larger fluctuations anyway, because you're just losing glycogen, you're losing water. Like, that's going to be okay. It's not that if you're above 1, boom, there goes all your muscle. Again, that's not most likely not going to happen. But if you're consistently losing above 1 or closer to 2%, maybe reassess and see where you're at, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, man, that was great. There's so much good stuff in there. I think on that last point also, like, um, especially if somebody has a lot of fat they're trying to lose, having that faster rate initially, sometimes they can lose a lot of weight on pretty high calories still,
Yeah.
right? If they're just a larger person. And so bigger drops anyway, like, it's not really challenging their hunger, but they get so motivated and bought in because they're losing weight so fast. And then you can slow it down, right? But so, like, that's always a tool that you can have. I'm so glad you highlighted we want to keep all the muscle around, which is why training is still so important. And a lot of people, even like if you're not trying to be a bodybuilder, cool, right? Nothing wrong with that. But a lot of people, they want that like toned look. They want to look athletic or whatever, right? That's muscle mass, right? It's more muscle with less fat. It makes you, that's what you look like, So like it's just such a key point. And maybe we can touch on training maybe at the end of this if we have time. If not, we can do a different episode on that, right? But and then you mentioned the data and how important that is, and just other examples to kind of underscore that. If you have a if you're a female or you're coaching female clients or whatever, like, there's even more fluctuations around the cycle, right? Perfectly, like, I'm actually coaching my girlfriend through a diet right now, and if we look at the weekly averages, it's still showing a trend, but it's pretty slow. We're trying to go slow on purpose, which is another thing too. If you find yourself, you diet really quickly, but then you just regain it all, maybe try to go slower, because it might be more sustainable to reverse back out of it at the end, right? Or come back. I don't mean reverse in terms of like the strict old school reverse diet, but just when you come back out. But anyway, so then the weekly trend, it's like, oh man, this is pretty slow. But when you look at the numbers that make up the weekly trend, when it's around the cycle, then it's like, really, there's some really high days that are then like, and then there's some other really low days later. Like, other things sort of reveal themselves if you look more closely at the data sometimes, or if you, like, I know what day we went out to eat and got pho. And I'm like, okay, it's really high sodium. Your next 2 weigh-ins were really high. That's probably why the weekly average is even higher, right? So you can just kind of tease some other things out like that if you're paying attention, if you have that data in front of you. And then one final piece on the data, and a last example, is circumference measurements are really hard, right? Like, they're messy. There's error associated with them. You got to always do it in the exact same spot, which is tough. But one that I find particularly helpful is just like right around your belly button, because you can always get it in the same spot. You have like a marker built in, right? But this is also, it's nice anyway, because most of us want to lose fat there and we want to avoid gaining fat there. So it's nice to kind of keep an eye on it. But I've had so many situations where maybe your body weight is not changing, or it's changing incredibly slowly or whatever. Sometimes it's even going up, but your waist circumference is going down week to week or every couple of weeks or whatever. And I'm like, this is fantastic. I wish this is always what would happen, right? But it just goes to show how scale weight isn't everything. It's not perfect. And ultimately we don't really care what the scale says. it doesn't matter what you weigh. Well, most of us, unless you're in like a weight class sport, right? But most of us, there's a certain look that we're aiming for. And so if that is happening regardless of changes on scale weight, that's perfect. So it can be nice to keep an eye on some things like that too, or even just informal things like how your clothes fitting, how do you feel when you look at yourself in the mirror. Or sometimes people will notice they're getting compliments and stuff from people, right? And like those sorts of like informal data can also be really helpful. And we're kind of getting a little bit into the weeds of like going through the diet rather than just setting it up, I guess, at this point. But it also, it's good to have this in mind as you venture out.
Exactly, because it's important to understand how we can assess that if we're telling you how to do it, right? So sometimes it helps to piece it together. So, hey, I'm looking for this rate of loss, but if for some reason that doesn't happen, I remember we pieced that together with looking at how clothes fit, looking at how I'm feeling. When my grandma says how cute I look, you know what I mean?
She's not just saying it's right.
No.
She means it, of course.
And then you just walk out of the house with a bunch of food, and you're like, yeah, she said I look good. So,
a question for you, sir, is we talked about a little bit of math, like percentage rate loss, that kind of stuff. That's great, right? But I can use that to figure out roughly how much weight I want to lose. Cool. But how do I set my calories to line up with that, right? And how do I kind of, how do I have confidence that that's the right amount of calories for me? And then building off that, then we got to track it, right? So we can kind of maybe mention that afterwards. But let's maybe start with just setting the targets. How do you like to do that?
Bro, just eat less, move more, end the podcast. That's it. Come on, calories in, calories out. Duh. It's I joke, but it's true, but also oversimplified to a point. I think sometimes online. I think, of course, we need to look at energy balance, and calories help us with that. And having a goal range for calories and then macro targets again can be very helpful. It's also not necessary. I want to point that out too. I think everyone thinks you need to track and you need to track everything. Again, this is another instance where it's a spectrum. You don't, if you don't want to track, if you find like it doesn't help you, if it stresses you out more than it does helpful, you don't need to track. That's okay, right? We can still get to where we need to by using other methods, right? And just like hunger and satiety cues, we can use just scale weight, and same thing there. We don't need everyday scale weight. If we have a couple data points, I think that's helpful. Typically, when we're looking at how much is helpful, prioritizing, of course, first and foremost, what's feasible and what's good for you, what's good for your mental health, and all that. But two, getting enough data where we can see some averages, right? Does that mean 3 days of weighing in 3 days, 4 days, 2 days, something, right? Something's always going to be better than nothing. So remember that. But then two, the data is helpful, right? If we have more, we can have a better understanding typically of what's happening, right? Because maybe if we do just do 3 times per week, what if we're just weighing on days that we happen to be lower and we don't get the higher days, or vice versa, whatever it is, right? And then just the importance of context and note taking and understanding why those things are happening. So it's, again, spectrum can be where you want to, but just importantly, you don't need to track. But I think I like at least having people start off tracking just so they can get an idea. Because if you've never tracked before, it can be very daunting, right? But also, if you look at it in a fun way and if you even gamify it, I think that can be very helpful, right? It's saying, hey, like we're going to see what we can do. We got this calorie range or this budget and we want to try to work with, and it's gonna be fun. We can play around with these foods. We can have foods that we thought we couldn't diet with because, hey, if as long as we're fitting into our calories, we can make that work. Then we realize quickly maybe we can't always have these foods, so we're focusing more on whole foods. You can learn so much just by tracking. And I think whenever I have someone starting off or teaching people about dieting, it can be a good place to start because of all the learning and growth that comes with it. You understand what portion size look like. It's like, oh, damn, that's what peanut butter actually looks like a serving size. I was doing 3 times that. That's like a very common one, right? So I think as a learning tool, it can be very helpful to start off. And then from there, deciding how frequent, how infrequent, and then that can also change throughout the months, the years, your phases, all that too. So I think just want to address that before you even get to the calorie targets. It can be as flexible as it needs to. It can very much just be a tool, as all things. It's great for learning, but not necessary 100%. So yeah, I think then if we're looking at something for targets, if a lot of the times it's, again, this is what we mentioned early on, if you didn't track before, ideally if we're starting and giving ourselves enough time to figure out what a rough maintenance calorie intake looks like, so we can figure that out. And then to even start there, a lot of times I'll just use a calculator online to say, hey, what are your rough calories? And I always end up using Andy Morgan's from rippedbody.com from like the old school. And I've been using that forever because it does a good job, because it accounts for like, body weight, your activity level, roughly, and then you just kind of put it in, and it shoots out a number. And I think that's important because it gives you a number somewhere to start. And from there, it's like, hey, aim for this. Then we'll collect our own data and see where that takes us. And we're looking at, for me, I usually like to get at least 2 weeks worth, so we have comparisons from week to week of averages, right? So use the calculator, figure out what rough maintenance is if we're there, because then from knowing maintenance, we can know what an appropriate rate of loss is and what that looks for calories, and vice versa. If we ever need to go down the gaining phase, we can account for that as well. But typically, when you're setting up a diet, a lot of the times people will say you're aiming for that 1 pound per week loss. Good place to start for most people, but I think prioritizing that 0.5 to 1% is a little bit better because it accounts for different levels. Because if you're like 40 kilos, right, if you're on the lighter side, that might be too much. And if you're on the heavier side, that might be too little, right? So I think the percentage wise and keeping it relative is important. But for most part, it ends up being, I think, I almost roughly take out like 300 to 500 calories to start for most people, because then there's that equation that people always say, like 3,500 calories is a pound, right? That's what people say. Yeah.
Not bad,
Yeah.
right? Muscle's a little different, but
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, again, somewhere to shoot where maybe we aim for that. And if we're minusing 500 calories per day, that's roughly where we're at. So I think sometimes just trying to figure out maintenance and roughly shooting to the 300 to 500 calorie loss per week might be a place to start. And then again, from there is where I collect the data and see what the rate of loss looks like. And then I adjust for that. So for me personally, I'm always prioritizing that rate of loss. And to get there, it's going to take some troubleshooting, quote unquote troubleshooting, but like some experimentation. So do you kind of do something similar? Do you how do you start off?
yeah, very similar. It kind of depends on the person, right? Like if someone's brand new to all this stuff, then I'm kind of like, this is kind of ideal in a way, because it's like either super experienced or brand new is like the ideal scenarios. Super experienced, they probably already know their maintenance calories, so we can just pick a number, boom, right, we're good. If they're brand new, generally I'm like, okay, well, let's build some awareness around what you're eating. Let's learn how to track, like the kind of those foundational skills. If I'm going to take a week or 2 or 3 or whatever to do that anyway, that's, if I have them track stuff, I can be learning about their maintenance calories. So like I'll have like a spreadsheet where I'm kind of collecting their whatever data I can get, and even if it's not every day, who cares? Give, at least a few days a week or something. Better than nothing. Because ultimately, and you were getting at this too, all we need is a reasonable starting point. If it's perfect, it doesn't really matter because we can adjust, right? So as long as we have something that's reasonable. But anyway, so I get, over the course of, if I can get at least 2 weeks, that's ideal. But how is your body weight changing? And then what are you eating on average, right? And it might just be calories, or maybe it's all the macros or whatever. But as long as we have at least body weight and calories, then I can look at, okay, well, on average, you're eating this much and your body weight is doing this. Cool. If it's maintaining, then that's roughly your maintenance. If you're gaining on average half a pound a week, or you're losing on average quarter pound a week, or whatever, right? We get those trends, and then from there you can kind of math out what maintenance is roughly. For people, I use a very very basic general rule of thumb, which is basically like, a 1 pound swing is around 500 calories surplus or deficit. Is that perfect? Absolutely not, but it's close enough, right? It's close enough that it doesn't matter. So, and it just makes the math so much easier. So you do that, right? If they're losing on it, or let's say they're gaining on average half a pound a week, they're on roughly 250 calorie surplus. Cool. Now I know what their maintenance is, right? It's not perfect, but it's close enough. It'll get you there. And then you can say, okay, based on our half to 1% loss per week that we're aiming for this person, they can lose wherever in that range we choose. Let's say it's 1 pound a week. Cool. 500 calories off their maintenance. Or let's say it's 1.5 pounds off. Cool. 750 off their maintenance. Whatever we choose, using that general rule of thumb of 1 pound gain or loss is roughly 500 surplus or deficit, can be, it gets you whatever you need, right? So like if someone's brand new, I like to have, that way it's all kind of packaged together and it's pretty time efficient and gets us there, and they're learning those foundational skills before we implement any hard numbers. But I'm formulating those hard numbers while they're learning the skills, so we can just kind of keep it rolling. If it's somebody who's kind of in the middle, or they just, maybe they're on a time crunch and they just really can't be bothered to do all that. There's various reasons why we might not do it. But in that case, then I'll do the same thing. Just use a calculator that it gets you in the ballpark, and then you try it, see how their body reacts for a couple weeks, and then you make an adjustment, and you're good. And sometimes it nails it, right? Like it's like, oh, cool, I don't need to do all this work. We can just let the internet do it for me. But yeah, so I'm very similar in that sense. I think the other thing I like to try to kind of do here, especially with newer people who aren't as familiar, is like start talking about, you mentioned portion sizes being a big thing and how you start to learn that as you practice tracking. But some food choice things, and some of them are obvious, right? Like maybe don't get pizza every day. You can have it sometimes, cool. Maybe it's less than what you really want, but whatever. But so some of them are obvious, but some of them are like beyond just the more fruits and vegetables, more lean proteins, less of the whatever. You can think about, for example, like in my contest prep, one of the things that got me through was I invested in a Ninja Creamy so I could make some really low calorie, high protein ice cream that tasted great. And like, we're chilling. I could have a gigantic, it's bigger than a pint, and it's like 300 calories or 400 calories or something, right? Really easy to fit, especially into a refeed day. I was having it on low days also. So it's like you can kind of think through some of those ideas, or like, okay, normal pizza doesn't make sense. Well, you can use like bread or a low calorie wrap or something as the crust. And, is it exactly the same? Is it as good as Domino's? No. But like Dr. Zordos, what is as good as Domino's? Nothing at all.
Bold claim. See how it
I
pays
don't think
off.
he agrees. He'll agree with me. He won't completely torch me in real life for saying this, as he has a few times recently. But yeah, so you can make little compromises like that, where you can be creative to save a bunch of calories, but still kind of scratch that itch, right? Or maybe it's stuff like they've never really cooked before, so you can start talking about some super super basic meal prep type things, right? And it's stuff that, to people who have been doing this for a long time, it feels so self-explanatory, but like we all were brand new to it at one point. How do I bake chicken in the oven? How long do I do it? How do I use the crock pot to do stuff so I don't have to stand there and watch it? How do I use a rice cooker? How do I prep sweet potato? Like, how do you just do all this stuff that we take for granted? Like, we had to learn it too, right? So, if we can start to build all those skills at the same time, like we're really off and running. And the tracking stuff can be, like you said, you can make it fun. Like, I remember what I did. This won't be fun for some people, but for some people it probably would be. It was for me. Was I made my own spreadsheet, and my coach was giving me macro targets, right? Or even I did this for myself too when I wasn't being coached, but I'd have my targets and I'd enter in what I ate that day. And I did this not every single day, but every day that I tracked. Then I might miss a day here and there, whatever. Who cares? But what I made the spreadsheet do is it would tell me how far off the target I was. So maybe I was down 5 grams of protein or up 11 grams of carbs or whatever, right? And then over the course of the week, it would average all those out, and I could see how well I adhered to the plan. And that was really satisfying. I wanted to see that error be as small as it could be. And it just it was fun, right? It felt like a game. Or you could do stuff, like I have a client right now who, one of the things that we're doing is we have these goals that we're aiming for. They're not macro goals right now, but they're like more habit-based goals and stuff. But you can do this with macros also. But you have it set up to where as you tick these boxes, you can build into your spreadsheet a little progress bar that fills up as you tick the boxes. And that's so cool to see. It scratches that video game itch, right? So you can do all kinds of fun stuff like that to kind of, keep things rolling. Oh, the last thing I was going to say too is, and maybe I'd like to get your perspective on this as well. When we start talking about tracking and sort of how to do it, what to use, because there's so many options these days. It's not just MyFitnessPal anymore. Do you have like a favorite one? Because there's pros and cons all over the place. There's some free ones, there's some paid ones. Some are cheaper, some are more expensive. You can just use pencil and paper if you want, if you're old school. Whatever. So I have some that I really like, but I've been talking forever, so I'd like to kick it back over to you for a second and see what you got.
All great stuff. And I think the main theme that comes out of that, I think, is the idea of, again, when you're looking at foods, is the idea of nutrient dense versus calorie dense foods, right? So some foods are going to be great options because they have more volume. You can eat a good amount of it and it still hits your macro and micro needs. Whereas some foods, you eat a little bit of it and the calorie is very high. So like, is that going to negatively affect your hunger and satiety? And that's going to affect how you can sustain your actual diet. So I think that is such a huge tool to keep in mind. It's something that you would learn, especially when you're going through it, is going through that. And then, yeah. And then it's funny because you said that we're using macros as a video game itch. Are we coping that bad? We can't play video games, so we have to. Damn, I feel you because I was the same way. I'm like, oh look, I'm playing Super Mario, and I'm just like inputting my protein. I'm like, oh, well I can't because I have data collection soon. So it's like, I feel you. Hey, it works. I think it's such a great thing to do because, like you said, if it makes you excited to track and to learn to go about it, and you're seeing progress, you're getting that response, visual feedback, all that, it's super helpful, and that can look many different ways for people. And like I said, some apps do a really good job of that as well. I think I no bias, but I love Macro Factor. I really do. It's I think the reason why it's so nice, one of the biggest things that really stood out, and it falls in line with my values and just my approach whenever I go with macros and things like tracking, is there's no it's a kind app. It's kind to you, right? There's no, okay, you went over calories, so we're showing you red because red equals bad. You're not still supposed to overeat. It's very neutral in terms of colors, in terms of if you go over calories, under calories, whatever it is. It just gives you the data, and it's just a data tracking app. Right? And I think that's super helpful to start because, again, if we're trying to be in this in the long haul, or if we're coming at it, we're going to be coming at it differently in different perspectives. We want to build a good relationship with food in general, with ourselves, with tracking, with training, and all that. So I think Macro Factor helps with that. I just remember with my Fitness Pal, it's like, damn, if I saw a lot of red, it kind of made me sad, right? And that's common. Don't get me wrong. I use my Fitness Pal for to 10 years. Like that's kind of what was all around when we first started, and it was great, and I enjoyed it. I think when they started to put more ads in there, and the scanner, the food scanning thing became you have to pay for, it was less likely to use. And then I think then now again, just Macro Factor does all that and better. So it feels worth the purchase and the price you're getting. The fact that you can get coached by Macro Factor too, like you can have all the coaching in there, is helpful. Again, it's not 100% accurate because it is a data thing. So like it uses what numbers it's given, right? It doesn't understand context. So it's important if you are going to use it just to be aware of that. And again, that's why it's nice to have a coach to use in comparison. I have a bunch of people who just do training with me and they're like, yeah, I just use Macro Factor, but it also will keep you updated on how it goes. It's like, hey, why is this happening? Because Macro Factor says I should decrease calories, but maybe we don't because like we talked about earlier, fluctuations. But Macro Factor is great. I don't have a code to use for a discount though. I'm just saying that because I like it.
Sponsor us. Yeah, Macro Factor's cool. I used it a little bit myself right when it launched. I used it a little bit. And I was just too cheap to pay for because it's a monthly. What's the payment? Is it $5 a month, something like that?
I think it's either that or you can pay like a one-time fee and have it forever. And it ends up being like a lot more upfront, but like in the end, you save money if you use it more than like 2 or 3 years or something like that.
Yeah. So I was too cheap personally, but it was awesome. And it also has not just the barcode scanner, right? We scan the food label and it uploads the data. Like you can just describe the meal and it will is it perfect? No, but it is pretty good, surprisingly good.
You can upload pictures now too. Like you do like your check-ins with the thing. You can upload like your progress pictures and all this other stuff. So you can have a lot more data on it. It's just comprehensive.
Yeah, that's really cool. And like you said, it can do some coaching stuff through it too. And a couple of them do that now. I know. Is Lane still doing his diet? Was it carbon?
I think so. I have not used it myself though. I don't know how it is. Yeah.
And then Jeremy Ethier just put out the Built with Science Plus app that I've looked at a little bit. It looks really, really nice. It's pretty similar. Where you can get coaching through it, and they actually have a thing too where you can take a picture of the food and it will estimate the macros from that too.
I've seen that happen more recently.
So there's really cool stuff out there, right? Monthly payments, they're not crazy expensive, but monthly payments. The one that I use is called My Macros Plus. It was a single payment of like $2 or $3. So dirt cheap.
Yeah.
But it's got it's got the barcode scanner. It's got the big food database. You can customize your macro targets. It's everything you need. You don't get coaching through it, and there's none of the cool AI stuff or whatever. But it got the job done for me, right? So anyway, lots of tools. They're all very, very user friendly. So just basically just pick one, right, and kind of roll with it, and you'll get used to using it pretty quick. It's not rocket science, and then you can kind of get into actually tracking your macros. And like you said before, and I want to emphasize again, you don't have to track macros, right? It is an option. It's more precise, so you have more control over the adjustments and how your body reacts. But it can feel more restrictive for people. Yes, there's a lot of flexibility. You can choose different foods as long as it fits the numbers, whatever. Super flexible in that sense, but you're still aiming for certain numbers, so it's still restrictive in that sense. So some people are going to do much better with just more habit-based approach, try to aim for these sorts of food groups or these portion sizes or these qualitative things or whatever. And it's less precise, probably going to take a little bit longer to reach your goal, a little bit harder to troubleshoot sometimes, but you absolutely can still do it. Anyway, that aside, let's say we're going to track macros. We need to set some targets, right? We talked about targets for rate of weight loss. We talked about targets for calories. And now we got to go into protein, carbs, and fats. So I guess most people are going to start with protein, right? That's obviously the best one.
So that matters.
Of course. Only one that matters. And we actually had a little bit more data that came out recently on this. So how do you like to start people off on their proteins?
Yeah, and like I kind of joke when I say that's all that matters. But again, if we're looking at that idea of it being a spectrum, sometimes you only have people just track total calories and protein, or we focus on just protein and kind of get whatever we need to, right? So you can be flexible there. And also too, like you said, we're likely using a bunch of different options. We're not just tracking or just having targets for macros and fruits and vegetables. A lot of times it's both or some degree of it. So just again, I'm really emphasizing that it can be many ways and just kind of fitting what works well for you. But yeah, when I have my calorie target, and another reason why too we spent so much time on calories, because if we're looking at the almighty muscle strength pyramids, again, the energy balance is what's going to matter the most, because that's what we're getting at, right? So the calories in versus calories out does have very big influence. And then of course how we get there does matter, but so long as you're ticking that box, your body composition will change if it's in line with what you're supposed to be doing, right? But of course we know it's not just that simple. But if we're looking at just tangible things, that's a great place to focus on, right? So then once we get the calories in place, we're trying to look at the macro breakdown. Starting with protein makes sense, and because importantly too, we talked about the idea of body composition and trying to keep muscle as much as we can. That's where protein is helpful, right? Because we still need to be training, and we want to be training and training hard. So we want to make sure that we're, giving our muscles the protein that they need. So starting there, the recommendation we've seen so frequently is the 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of total body weight. Right, so there's a range, again, importance of ranges, and importantly to emphasize, it is total body weight, because you will see some recommendations be off of fat-free mass, and typically it is more accurate, but you need to be able to get an accurate measure of your fat-free mass, which for most people it's not going to happen. If you have that, that's great. Yeah. So it's like, can you get a DEXA? And then even then we have some fluctuation, but that's where practicality wise, we're just going to go for total body weight because it's somewhere to start. So that 1.6 to 2.2, that's 0.8 to 1.1 for pounds, something like that. Or do whatever it is, right? But typically, and that's where it comes in practicality, a lot of people say 1 gram per pound of body weight. And that roughly brings us to the 2 grams per kilogram. And I like to start there for most people too, because if we're on that range, and I'm prioritizing building and retaining muscle, and protein is important to me, I want to have as much insurance as I can. So being at that 2 is a little bit more of an insurance policy that I'm going to minimize my chances for a pretty good degree. And it's easy to math out, right? So that 1 gram per pound body weight or 2 grams per kilo, great place to start. But as you said, we've got some research like a couple of weeks ago, even, where it's saying for those who are very much, basically bodybuilders, those who really care about muscle retention and keeping as much muscle as possible, even higher ends could probably increase those chances even more so. There was that, I think the range was like 1.9 to 2.5, so extending that range a little bit more. So again, if you're in that 2, that's still good. And there's a little bit of evidence too suggesting like as high as like 3.4 to 4.4 or 4.2 grams per kilogram could help a little bit more. But then that's where we start getting into the really min-maxing style of things, and then of course too understanding at what cost and playing that like calorie budget thing. Like, okay, if we're spending 4 grams per kilo, on protein, how much do we have left for carbs and fats? And does that affect how we're feeling, how we're performing, all these other things that are also important, right? We're not just looking at body composition things. Yes, that's important, but we need to understand what goes into that. So I think for most people, again, safe and easy gram per pound body weight, 2 grams per kilo. Start there, see how you feel, and from there, everything else kind of falls into place. It's pretty easy. But for protein, is that kind of how you feel too, or are you team high protein, or are you team minimal protein? Like, what team are you on, man?
I'm on team. Let's think critically and pick the best thing for that individual circumstance.
You can't do that nowadays in social media. Stop doing that. We have to pick teams and fight each other.
That's true. I'm on team 5 grams per kilo. That's what I want.
Yeah, baby, now we're talking.
Yeah. I'm on team however much protein is in a Domino's. That's what we're doing.
Surprisingly good amount.
Yeah, right. But yeah, that's super. Again, like most people, we need something that's just a pretty easy rule of thumb.
Yeah.
1 gram per pound is a super easy rule of thumb, and even that, there's certainly an argument for going lower than that. If you don't really care about optimal muscle retention, then cool, right? You have less, that's okay. But if you do care about that, then you probably want, that sort of, based on the most recent evidence, we probably want to be getting really close to that 1 gram per pound, maybe higher than that. And I think that lines up with a lot of people's experience too, and just with some practical stuff. Like, you've been in deficit, especially for a while, you're getting leaner and leaner. You tend to get hungrier. Protein tends to be a little bit more filling than some other things, so that could be helpful anyway. And if it actually does help you retain more muscle, which is a lot of bodybuilding coaches have come to swear by that too. And lo and behold, just like so many other instances, the research is catching up. So yeah, I'm super on board with all that stuff that you said. And I think the only thing I'll add is if somebody is listening to this and they're like, okay, so you're telling me I need to eat 180 grams of protein per day. I'm used to eating 30. Like, what? Because we've all also, like, now it would be weird to not eat 200 grams of protein a day. It would feel really weird. But there was a time when it felt astronomical to have that much. So to those people, what I like to do is, like, you're used to 30. Okay, cool. Let's see if we can get like 50. And let's just try that for a couple weeks. And then let's aim for 70. And, just kind of walk it up gradually. It's just much less of a shock to the system and the wallet, right? Because protein can certainly be a little bit more expensive. So, but yeah, that's really all I got on the protein side. And then in terms of carbs and fats, like you said, we can just kind of let them. You can just do calories and protein, and you're going to be good in a lot of almost all circumstances. I think you could argue. In terms of like a contest prep, maybe there's some benefits to tracking all of it, but like most people aren't going to be doing that, and that's not really what we're talking about today so much. So you can just let them chill. If you do want specific targets, there's some evidence that having really, really low fat intakes for a long time is probably not the best, just for general health, hormonal health, all that kind of stuff. So I think the typical recommendation is what, like 20-ish% of your calories or something like that.
I think once you get below 20% of your total calories, like, you could edge line, and then below 15, you're like more likely to be like, okay, like, this is probably too low. Yeah. So for like, yeah.
So basically, like, just don't go super low for a super long time. You're and you're going to probably notice also, you're going to be like, man, I feel really weird. You're not just going to die, but you're going to slowly feel weirder and weirder and weirder. And, you'll see, like, males especially, you'll start to notice, like, energy's down, libido is down, motivation to train is down, all those kinds of things, which to a small extent is par for the course if you're doing a longer diet. But if it seems excessive and it happens like right away or whatever, it's like, okay, maybe we exchange some of the carbs for some more fat. And we don't want to go, well, you certainly can go with a really high fat and low carb approach. Some people feel great doing that. I think most people, we probably want at least some carbs to help them feel more energetic and kind of fuel their training and recovery, and keep their glycogen stores relatively high and things like that. Those can all be helpful. And if you get really into the weeds, like super low glycogen all the time is probably not the best for muscle retention anyway. There's some weird like molecular biochem stuff going on in there with AMPK and mTOR and all this stuff. So don't overthink it, basically, right? Try to avoid extremes. But yeah, you can kind of stick with calories and protein for the most part if that's what feels good for you.
I remember this might have been 2 or 3 years ago, so it might have changed slightly, but I remember Eric Trexler and Greg Knuckles on a podcast talking about there was some research comparing that, like, how, like, 1.6 is the low end that we recommend for like just muscle mass building, but like what about more gen pop and just in general, right? Like how different is 1.6 to like 1.5, 4, 3? And I'm pretty sure like that 1.3 to 1.6 was very minimally different, right? Like 1.3 to 1.6, there's gonna be a slight difference, but like for most people, it's not gonna be the end of the world. And then importantly, it's about the trends. Like if one of the days again you go 1.3 because you have more carbs and fat, because maybe you felt like you needed it and you wanted it, or you had more food because you were going out in an event and you substituted that. One day you're fine. Trust me, don't worry about it. All right. But again, if you want to play the insurance policy, you're very much focused on maximizing and building muscle, retaining muscle, being closer to 1.6 and even more so the 2 and slightly above makes sense. But like we can go, there's ranges, man. There really is. And it could be that's 1 is 1.3 if people want that like number to it. But yeah, and like you said, with the carbon fats, there's data too that's suggesting like as long as the total calories is there, there's not much of a difference. And that's, I think that's been seen a couple of times now. But in practice, what I find, and this might be myself and my own bias, but I find I like higher carb stuff, like you said, because it just feels like I can train better that way, right? And if maybe it's not the carbohydrates itself, and probably slightly is, yes, but also just like having food in you, because we're starting to see that now too, is like just having some food in you rather than not necessarily the carbs itself, but also don't want to be eating a high fat meal before training because I'll feel terrible. so right, like that's another thing. It's a practical thing, and in general, like when I'm dieting to like show how much I do, like I sometimes have 80 to 90% of my total carbohydrate intake around training, so like pre and post, because I feel like I need it, whether I do or not. You can make an argument, sure, but if I'm going to my training with a good amount of carbs, I feel good. I tend to perform well. Afterwards, I want to replenish that too. And I also need energy because I got to do a lot of work after, and I need to be present for that work. So I need to have it. And in my last meal, because I'm usually breaking up to 3 meals for me personally, I don't really need much carbs because it's closer to bed and I don't have that much to play around with. So let me fill in with the protein and a lot of micros if I need to make up for it. So it's like we have these numbers, we have these things we're aiming for, of course, but also we need to see how it fits within our life. And we're seeing time and time again, there's so many approaches, 3 meals versus 6 meals. There's not much of a difference for whatever fits for you. Because like I said, someone might have heard me say 3 meals and they're like, excuse me, sir, what about maximally spiking your protein and leucine every single time? I don't know if we have enough data to really say that. And more data that comes out is more like, dude, just total protein in the day, right? Sure, maybe like there was like 1 or 2 papers, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, they're like you could maybe have more muscle growth if you're aiming from like 4 to 6. But like, is that going to be enough for you to stay within your calorie needs and your training needs? Or is it going to take you far away from that? And can you sustain that? And to what point? And it's just like, it really is just a cost benefit analysis for yourself at the end of the day. Sure. in the trends. But yeah, I think it's funny because people can listen to this and say, dude, you guys oversimplified, but also undersimplified. We'll probably get both, right? And it's true both ways as well, because we're undersimplifying, saying that, hey, really just tick these basics. There's so many ways to do it, but consider context. And we just can't speak on that context because we don't know you personally, beloved viewer, listener. We wish we did, but that's where, again, having a coach is just super helpful because they can know you better and give you more specific directions. This will help most people get to some place to start and get in a great spot, but you do need to collect your own data, whatever it looks like. It doesn't have to look like tracking again, and work with that and go from there. And of course, if you're not sure how to do that, hit us up. We got you. We do know what we're talking about.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Yeah. So did we hit on every single tiny thing you can consider in this episode? Probably not, right? There's some, you could play around with, do you want to do intermittent fasting or do you not? Like you said, how many meals? Like there's so much stuff you can play with, but at the end of the day, if you're hitting these big picture principles we talked about, you're going to be fine, right? There's some little minutia that matters if you're trying to get stage lean, but most people aren't, right? So you're going to be good. The biggest things, like we mentioned before, that just consistent adherence, something that's realistic, sustainable, where you're not setting yourself up for failure and you can just kind of get in, do the day-to-day. It feels manageable. You reach your goals. You're shredded on the beach. You get all the people just, they want to date you. They want pictures with you. They think you're famous. You're winning at life.
I can't wait.
That's what we're here for, right?
Can't wait.
It's all that matters.
And if I don't, I'm blaming you, Jake. So that's what I hear from this episode. And we'll probably, like I said, there's more to talk about, but I think we can do a whole episode where it's like we did that training, the more quote unquote advanced techniques, where it's like, not that it's advanced, but it's more of a, hey, once you got all this stuff in check, here's some things to consider, like the refeeds, how to approach training, what are the things to think about. But want to let this sit with you for a little bit, because again, you focus on those basics, it's going to take you far. It really is. So as always, appreciate you all listening. Appreciate you being here. Enjoy Mario Day. Go play some cool Super Mario. Go pet some turtles. Don't hurt them, please. And as always, we'll catch you at the next episode.